Hello, everybody. Welcome to an episode of David Talks. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials. So, for those of you who do not know what the Roswell UFO incident is, it was an incident that occurred around Independence Day in 1947, about 75 miles from the town of Roswell, New Mexico, by a rancher by the name of Mac Brazel, who found something weird in his sheep pasture, and which looked like a mess of metallic sticks held together with tape, chunks of plastic and foil reflectors, and scraps of a heavy glossy paper-like material. Unable to identify these strange objects, Mac called Roswell sheriff, and the sheriff came by and they couldn't even identify what this was. So then they called the Army Air Force Base. So these soldiers came by and they made sure just to see if there was any extra material like substances of this debris, and of course, a couple days later after that, there was a newspaper headline that said "Captured Flying Saucer on Ranch in Roswell Region," and it was a top story in the Roswell Daily Record. But the question was, is it true, right? Because a couple days later, which was on July 9th, an Air Force official clarified the paper's report, saying that the alleged flying saucer was only a crashed weather balloon. But for anyone who saw the debris in person, it's clear that this thing was from another realm, wherever this thing was, and that it wasn't a weather balloon. And many people still believe that this material-like substance was not from Earth at all, and that it was from an alien spaceship. Now, during the 1950s and the 1940s, the Air Force, they were conducting a series of secret dummy drops all over the air bases and the unoccupied fields across New Mexico. And these experiments were meant to test ways for pilots to survive falls from high altitudes. And it had these fearless dummies made out of latex skin and aluminum bones, which looked a lot awfully like space aliens, which is the Greys today that we know of. And they're supposed to be falling from the sky onto the ground and being caught by these military vehicles that would descend on the landing site to retrieve the bodies as quickly as possible. Now, this seems very suspicious because, right, knowing the fact that this could be an experimented weather balloon, it's the way they are retrieving it, how quickly it is for them to be putting it into their armored trucks, and of course, at the same time, this is stuff that we could buy at a store, right? We have aluminum foil, we have tape, but again, it's suspicion, right? Because since this is an experiment, why are these dummies, why do they look like alien greys? That's the big question. They have the big forehead and the big almond-shaped eyes. It just doesn't make any sense. So, if these were supposed to be test pilots, why can't they just make them look like regular human beings? Why the big eyes and the big head? And on top of that, it wasn't until after this happened, that same year, was a couple months later after this, there was the first UFO incident reported. So, little by little, we're getting some data. So, the first well-known UFO sighting, it occurred a couple months later when a businessman by the name of Kenneth Arnold claimed to see a group of 9 high-speed objects near Mount Rainier in Washington while flying his small plane. Now, Arnold estimated that the speed of the crescent-shaped objects were several thousand miles per hour, and he said that they moved like saucers skipping on water. But it wasn't until the newspaper report that followed that it was mistakenly stated that the objects were saucer-shaped, and that's how we got the term flying saucer. But then, a couple years later, it wasn't until the U.S. Air Force, they began an investigation because there was an increase of these unidentified flying objects. And at the same time, we had the Cold War tension mounting, and again, there was a statement saying that these UFOs were most likely Soviet aircraft, but some researchers suggested that they might be spacecraft from other worlds, which is UFOs. Now, around 1952, they started putting these reports in this book of all the sightings that were occurring in the world. Now, from 1952 to 1969, Project Blue Book had reports of more than 12,000 sightings and events, right? Each ultimately classified as identified with a known astronomical, atmospheric, or artificial phenomenon, or unidentified. So, now that we know about Roswell, and now that we know about the first UFO experience, the government is even providing a book about it, Project Blue Book. So you got 3 things happening within that short period of time. Why is it that within that short period of time, strange things are starting to happen? Now, a couple years later after this, over 10 years after this happened, the first alien abduction case was reported by a couple by the name of Betty and Barney Hill. Now, on the night of September 19th, 1961, the Hills were driving back from a short holiday in Canada to their home in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, when at around 10:30 p.m., Betty spotted a bright light near the moon. When it appeared to get bigger and brighter, they stopped the car and observed the light through binoculars. Betty thought she saw a huge, oddly shaped craft that might be a UFO. Barney thought that it was an aircraft, however, he quickly changed his mind. A little farther into their journey, they stopped again, and Barney got out of the car to observe the craft through the binoculars. So he walked toward the craft until he was about 50 feet from it as it hovered to about tree height. And he later reported that he saw a huge pancake-shaped craft with a row of windows behind, which were at least a dozen occupants in dark Nazi-like uniforms. Barney panicked, and he got back into the car and drove home. Now, the Hills heard 2 sets of beeping sounds that appeared to cause their car to vibrate as they drove home, eventually arriving home in daylight at 5:15 in the morning. The last 200 miles of their journey had taken 7 hours, much longer than it should have, and they did recall leaving the highway onto a dirt road and coming across a roadblock of some kind, as well as seeing some sort of glowing orb. When they arrived home, Barney noticed that his shoes had scuff marks and the leather strap on his binoculars were torn. He had this urge to examine his groin area in the bathroom, but he noticed nothing unusual while he was doing this. But Betty noticed an odd pink powder on her torn dress, and they found strange polished patches on their car that seemed to affect a compass needle. They also found that they could recall very little of what happened between hearing the first set of beeping sounds and the second. Now, 10 days after this incident, Betty began having a series of dreams, lasting over 5 nights that seemed to fill in some of the gaps in memory. In her dreams, she and Barney were stopped by a group of humanoids at the roadblock and then taken aboard by the alien vessel. Now, these aliens were about 5 feet tall with large eyes, mouths like thin slits, and no protruding ears. But they communicated with a mixture of telepathic and broken English. Now, this is what we would call, by this description, as the Greys, right? Like I was saying earlier about the test dummies. And on that, through this bright flashback that they were having, the Hills were boarding onto the craft, and they were separated, and each was medically examined. So this was involving the collection of their skin, nails, and hair samples. And in Betty's case, there was an insertion of a long needle into her navel, which was excruciating pain for her. So by this, though, Betty was shown a star map allegedly showing the major trade routes used by the aliens. So the aliens were showing her a map, a trade map, right, to her, telling them where they were from. So a few months later, Barney and Betty were bothered by this experience because these dreams were very repetitive. They went to go for psychiatric treatment, and Barney was suffering from stress and exhaustion along with ulcers that he developed in his stomach, and of course a ring of warts, and he noticed there was a ring of warts developed around his groin area. So 1 year after treatment, he requested to undergo hypnotic regression in the hope that this would reveal what really happened on that fateful journey from Canada to New Hampshire. And he had his first hypnotic regression session by this guy by the name of Dr. Benjamin Simon around December of 1963. So these memories were recovered during this hypnotic regression, and they were very similar to the narrative in Betty's dreams. So look at this. So it started out without without psychiatric treatment, that Betty was getting these dreams without a psychologist or a psychiatrist allowing her to recover these memories. But yet at the same time, Barney going to a psychologist and a psychiatrist through hypnosis is reporting the same thing in the dream, the same detailed memories as Betty's. So Barney recalled a cup-like device being placed over his genitals, and which he believed had been used to extract sperm. Now, as a result of this post-hypnotic suggestion by Dr. Simon, Betty was able to draw a copy of the star map that she had been shown. Now, basically, this was a star map of where these aliens claimed they were from. They were from the Zeta Reticuli system, and this is where they would call home, where they're from. Now, this story was told in books, and this was such a very famous incident to where they even made a TV series about it, which included the exact scene of not remembering where they were, but only remembering this UFO and then blacking out. And of course, sensing that there was a huge time gap between where they were at, trying to figure out what time is it. So anyway, this was one of the first UFO stories. Now, we want to keep in mind that this was 14 years after the Roswell crash. I mean, this was, about 14 years after 1947. And again, it's shit that's going down. Things are happening. You're starting to get stories. You're starting to get Project Blue Book coming out, right? All this stuff is going on. Now, seeing that this is an experience, an experience of the UFO sighting, right? It's interesting because it was so stressful for these two couples where it affected their marriage. Because who would believe that this would happen? If they told a story about it to the public, they would look at them very crazy. So, knowing that this is one of the first UFO stories, there's a transition into that. There's been victims that were abducted by these extraterrestrials, and they claimed that there was devices implanted in them that doctors could not for sure theorize how these objects got into their bodies, right? So this is a story of a woman by the name of Betty Andreessen Luca, who in the winter of 1967, she had 7 children living in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, and this was a life-altering event for her, right? There's another woman by the name of Betty having another UFO experience. Now, one evening while Betty was at home with her family, there was a series of strange events unfolded that would forever change her perception of reality. So as the evening progressed, Betty noticed peculiar lights outside of her home, resembling those of a police car. Upon investigation, she was shocked to discover that the lights were not from an earthly vehicle, but rather emanated from a hovering craft of unknown origin. Paralyzed with fear, Betty watched in disbelief as the craft descended towards her home, bathing the surrounding area in an unworldly glow. Suddenly, there was a beam of light that engulfed Betty, and several members of her family became immobile by this light. They could not move. And it wasn't until moments later they found themselves inside a craft surrounded by beings, and beings that they've never seen before. And they were described as humanoid in appearance with large wraparound eyes and grayish skin. And these beings communicated telepathically to them with Betty and her family, trying to calm them down, saying that everything's going to be okay. But Betty and her family, they were subjected to a series of medical examinations by these extraterrestrials and psychological tests as well. And they noticed that there is an advanced technology possessed by these beings far beyond human comprehension. And during this examination, Betty experienced a sense of detachment from her physical body as if she was observing the events from a distance. After what felt like hours, Betty and her family, they returned to their home, only with fragmented memories of their abduction experience remaining. In the days and weeks that followed, Betty, she began to experience strange physical symptoms, including unexplained marks on her body and episodes of missing time. And her being concerned, she's seeking medical attention, and she was shocked to discover that doctors were able to find in her x-rays mysterious objects resembling small metallic implants that were found in various locations throughout Betty's body, including behind her ear and her nasal cavity. Despite the testing and analysis, the doctors were unable to determine the origin and the purpose of these implants. And some experts speculated that they could be tracking devices or monitoring devices inserted by the beings during the abduction experience. And this story gained a lot of attention within the UFO community and beyond, sparking debates about the nature of her experience and the existence of extraterrestrial life, especially these mysterious implants, adding intrigue to the doctors, thinking, how did these objects get into her body? We can't even implant that in her body. Like, it's hard. So it's one of the most compelling accounts, especially if you have physical evidence of these objects being in her body and doctors can't even explain it. So, again, this happened 20 years after the Roswell crash and 6 years after the Barney and Betty Hill story. Now, we know, looking at these stories, that we got all this stuff happening. We got Project Blue being a thing about the recording of this UFO and abduction phenomenon. And think about it. This was founded by the United States Air Force, and this is a branch of our federal government, guys. And, right, the government doesn't tell you everything. The government's going to tell you what they want to hear. They're going to say, oh, it's just an experiment. Oh, we're just experimenting aircraft, whatever. But at that time, between 1947 and 2020, you got to understand, anything with these experiences that these victims had, there was how could I say, there was stories, right, that the government would reply saying that this is being an experiment or you're imagining this. But they would always claim that this was experimented aircraft technology and that some of these stories were real or fake. But think about it. 74 years later, you all remember this is around when COVID was a thing. On June 2021, the United States government released a highly anticipated report on identified aerial phenomenon, commonly referred to as UFOs. Now, the report, it didn't constitute an outright admission of extraterrestrial origins, but it marked a significant step in acknowledging and addressing the phenomenon. And the report was prepared by the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and this was mandated by Congress as part of the Intelligence Authorization Act. And it aimed to provide a comprehensive assessment of UAP sightings reported by military personnel and other credible sources. Now, the report acknowledged that UAP sightings pose a potential threat to national security, as some of these incidences involved intrusions into restricted airspace and encounters with military aircraft. And it also confirmed that the majority of the documented sightings remained unexplained. So basically, the government is admitting that they don't know what this mysterious object is, right? Now, why is it taking them that long to tell the public, 74 years after the Roswell crash of 47 happened, for them to admit to the public that they don't know what these UFOs are, right? Think about it. But at the same time, you got all this stuff happening. You got these abductions. You got Project Blue Book happening from 1952 to 1969. You didn't tell me that you didn't just find out about this. It's been around for years. For years. So, there's a lot of unanswered questions about that. So, for starters, we don't know what goes behind closed doors with our American government. And the government, like I said, is only going to tell you what you want to hear. But how much does the president know? We don't know, nor do they have the authority to see what the government could be hiding. Now, here's a story about a guy named Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon, two very famous celebrities. Richard Nixon was the 37th president of the United States between 1969 and 1974. And Jackie Gleason was an entertainer and comedian, most famous for his show The Honeymooners, which aired from 1955 to 1956. And Jackie Gleason mostly did his shows in Miami, Florida, and he once lived in Lauderhill, Florida. So him and Richard Nixon, they had a great friendship, and Gleason would always play golf tournaments with him. But Gleason had a fascination with UFOs and the paranormal. So one day he asked Richard Nixon a question about a conversational topic on being the only human beings existing in space, and about this whole government hiding the fact that there's aliens among us. While there's doubt surfacing, like any other of the stories told of the people getting abducted by aliens, that this actually happened, it was told that in this story that in one Florida evening, when Gleason received an unexpected call from his friend Richard Nixon, after they played golf, they were always up for adventure, and obviously Nixon invited him for a night out, right? And Jackie Gleason said, "Sure, I'm down." So him eagerly accepting Nixon's invitation to join him for a night out, little did Jackie Gleason know that this would be a night that he would never forget. So as they cruised along in the presidential limousine, the conversation turned into topics for beyond mundane affairs of politics. Now, Nixon hinted at something extraordinary, something beyond the comprehension of ordinary citizens. And Gleason, intrigued by Nixon's oddly approach to the conversation, pressed him for details. Now, kind of seeing where this was going, it wasn't until that Nixon told Jackie and said that they were going en route to Homestead Air Force Base, a highly classified facility known for its involvement on top-secret military operations. Gleason's curiosity got the best of him, and he awaited with this news. Now, upon arriving at the base, they were greeted by tight security and an aura of secrecy that permeated the air. Nixon, seemingly unfazed by the clandestine nature of their visit, led Gleason through a series of corridors until they reached a nondescript door guarded by armed personnel. With a subtle nod to the guards, Nixon ushered Gleason into a dimly lit chamber, the contents of which would forever alter his perception of reality. Before him laid what appeared to be the lifeless bodies of extraterrestrial beings preserved in a state of suspended animation. Gleason froze in disbelief, with his mind struggling to process this sight in front of him. Nixon, ever the consummate showman, regaled Gleason with tales of government cover-ups and clandestine operations, weaving a narrative that blurred the lines between fact and fiction. Now, basically, this story is interesting because you have a Hollywood celebrity that was shown by the President of the United States that there was extraterrestrial bodies laying in a morgue, right? Now, this scared the crap out of him because he's saying, wow, am I actually seeing this, right? And it scared the hell out of him that he's seeing these alien greys in front of him, that he that same night he starts getting just scared and shaking, and noticed that he was shaken very badly, and not really at first telling her what he just saw, but eventually through constant persistence from his wife, who got info out of him, that's when Gleason confided, basically saying that the President of the United States just got finished showing me dead bodies of these alien greys that are from another planet. And this was in a Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. But he told his wife, and after telling her the story of what he just saw, to not tell anybody. But it wasn't until after they divorced that's when she freely discussed the stories. Now, this started going around, and of course, during the mid-1980s, one of Jackie Gleason's friends, who was a UFOologist, Larry Bryant, sued the U.S. government to get it to reveal its UFO secrets. And of course, he tried without success to have Gleason testify on the spot for it. But the question is, what else of the UFO secrets are out there? Well, we have this guy by the name of Bob Lazar. Now, giving a little bit of his educational background, he attended Pierce Junior College in Los Angeles, where he studied electronics. He later earned a master's degree in physics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a master's degree in electronic technology from California Institute of Technology. And it wasn't until 1989 Lazar claimed to have worked at a facility known as S4, located near Area 51 in Nevada. And he alleged that the facility housed alien space aircraft and that he was involved in the reverse engineering. He was involved in reverse engineering the aircraft and observing their propulsion systems. Now, Lazar claimed to have encountered several extraterrestrial technologies and beings during his time there. And this story gained widespread attention after he appeared in the interviews with journalist George Knapp in the Las Vegas television station KLS-TV. And airing in November of 1989, it allowed the public to have an increased interest in UFOs and government secrecy. Now, so according to Lazar, S4 was a highly classified facility located near Area 51 in the Nevada desert, and he claimed that the facility consisted of several hangar-like buildings built into the side of a mountain. Now, Lazar described S4 as being involved in research related to advanced propulsion systems and extraterrestrial technology. So he was hired to work at S4 in 1988 as a physicist specializing in propulsion systems. He claimed to have been briefed on the nature of his work, which involved studying and reverse engineering alien spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. So he was able to take these alien spacecrafts and actually observe how it worked, right? So he was a reverse engineer on that. Now, one of the most chilling, significant aspects of Lazar's claim was his mention of element 115. And this was in the 1980s, everybody. And it wasn't until 2003 that this was added into the scientific element chart known as, I think, ununpentium. And Lazar claimed that this was a component of the propulsion systems of the alien spacecraft, that this was fuel for the ship to fly. And at that time, this wasn't synthesized, guys. He was, him talking about element 115 before it was adopted in the scientific element chart. Now, that's kind of creepy, right? And what this did is it was able to generate a gravity wave that allowed the UFO to travel like vast distances and speed through space. Now, according to Lazar, the propulsion system of this alien spacecraft that he was working on, he described the spacecraft generating a gravitational field around itself, effectively creating a distortion in space-time. So by manipulating this distortion, the craft would achieve propulsion without the need for conventional fuel or propulsion methods. And he said that these UFOs had an anti-gravity technology to achieve levitation and propulsion, and he described the craft as having no visible means of propulsion, such as engines or exhausts, and instead it relied on the manipulation of gravity fields to achieve flight. So as he's telling this to the public, Lazar is being faced with like legal and personal challenges, and he was even claiming to be harassed and intimidated by the government agencies, and of course, this continued to be a remaining story, a very famous story. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, I would suggest watching Bob Lazar's Area 51 and Flying Saucers, and it's a Netflix documentary, so you need to see it for yourself. So let me just end this on a note, right? We have all these events that are happening. We have Bob Lazar. We have these UFO incidences that are happening. We have Project Blue Book happening. You mean to tell me that we're the only beings out here in the universe? Well, I'm going to give you a statistic about this that you can find, and this is quoted, right? Because as of 2021, about 65% of respondents said that they think there is, right, 65% of respondents living in the United States, basically 65% of people that live in the United States, believe that there is intelligent alien life on planets other than Earth. And about 87 said that UFOs aren't a security threat to the U.S. at all, or only represent a minor one, right? So about 3/4, 76% of the adults under age 30 say intelligent life exists on other planets versus 57% of those 50 and older. So this means that more younger people below the age of 30, which is me, I am one of them, they believe that there are aliens and intelligent life out there, and that they are here and that they are living among us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include that link in the description, but so that way you guys can take a look at it. But other than that, I want you all to say that I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you're a believer, awesome. If not, it is what it is. All I know is there's life that's out there. If you believe it, great. If not, it's fine. I mean, but all I know is there has to be other people out there besides us. Anyway, see you next week, and remember, subscribe to my channel, guys, and I will see you on the next episode.